Hey, everybody, welcome back to Scar Stories Podcast. I'm Nicole Golden. And if you haven't already, please log on to NicoleGolden.org. I have a prayer journal on there that I'm so excited about, 7 days, and just talks about anxiety, depression, fear, guilt, brokenness, loneliness, exhaustion. So I really encourage you to go to the website, subscribe to the emails, and you can get that sent to you for free. But I have back with us one of your favorite guests, Mike Brannan. And I told Mike about this, just right before we got on. And then also, I think in an email, I can't remember, right? We set this up a while ago. We set this up pre-break and pre-New Year, which,
Right.
But I actually had someone message in and ask for us to do a podcast about this topic. And so I want to encourage you guys, like if there's stuff you want us to cover or discuss, message me, email me, text me if you got my number. I love suggestions. Mental health is such a broad category that there's so many things we can cover. So if there's things that will help you, let us know. But today we're going to talk about ADD and ADHD. And this is a little bit, I was a teacher for 3 years and I knew kind of surface level about this stuff, but I didn't know a ton. So I'm going to be learning a lot today as we go along with this. But a mom had actually emailed me and just said like, hey, both of my boys have this and people are pushing medication. They're doing all the work for the boys. When do I get help for them? When do I push them? And so I was like, we're going to talk to Mike about this. So Mike, do you want to share a little bit real quickly about why I would have even come to you in the first place? Like why this is kind of close to your heart and special to you, this topic?
Yeah, well, I was never formally diagnosed with ADHD, but whenever I was going through grad school, I definitely was like, whenever we read the DSM, which is our diagnostic statistical manual, our Bible, whenever I was going through that, of course, I'm like, oh, that's me. Oh, that's me. Oh, that's me. But whenever we got to ADHD, I was like, wow, this explains so much about my childhood, so much about some of the struggles that I had, and some of the things that I see in my life that works for me, and some of the things that don't work so well for me. So, and then as I got into the field and working with kids and working with families, this is definitely my favorite topic to discuss and to work with. And so I'm very glad that you invited me, Nicole, to discuss this with you. But then also as a parent, whenever me and my wife started having kids, once again in that elementary school age time, my oldest son, we kind of started seeing some things, and I was like, I remember that. I remember what it was like. I want to get help for him, and so we've done some different things to try to help him out, and he's doing very well in high school this year. So,
and I love that because I talk to a lot of parents who struggle with different mental health issues or learning disabilities or whatever, and they get so afraid they're going to pass it on to their children, and almost like their child's going to relive what they went through as a child. And I remember Kevin, my counselor, who's your colleague, told me, when you are diagnosed with something, your children are less likely to battle with it because you will notice the signs early and get them the help they need right away, which is really encouraging. So, and I'd forgotten to say, in case people hadn't heard our previous interview that we'd done a couple of months ago, Mike is a counselor and someone that I really trust. He works at the same practice as my counselor, Kevin. So I really appreciate Mike's perspective on things. So Mike, let's start with this question. What is the difference, just for those of us who don't know, between ADD and ADHD? Is there a difference? Because I feel like those terms get thrown around together and interchangeably. And so I'm just wondering, what is the difference between the two of them?
Well, like I said, the DSM is our Bible. That's where we get all of our statistics from, but also our diagnosing code and criteria. And there used to be a difference between ADD and ADHD.
Okay.
But in this most recent version, number 5, it is just ADHD.
Okay.
So The difference is that there's and of course, what does ADHD stand for? It stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Okay.
Um, and that in amongst itself is a scary sounding thing sometimes.
Yes.
It really isn't. Attention deficit, so meaning kind of lacking some attention, hyperactivity, and they always want to put everything as a disorder.
Yeah, yeah.
So the ADHD has some different types. There's a combined type, but then but of the two main types, which is the hyperactivity and then also the inattentive.
Okay.
A lot of times we see, that kid that kind of seems like they have abundant wealth of energy and they are just bouncing off the walls, and to get them to sit still for 5 seconds, and I can hear all of the teachers going, yes, I know that kid.
Yeah, yeah.
They just are constantly on the go. And even whenever they're sitting still, their legs are bouncing or they're just kind of still moving. That is that hyperactivity type of kid. But
Okay.
there's also ADHD kids that maybe don't have that hyperactivity. Maybe it's just more of the inattentive type. Maybe it's a hard time focusing. Maybe it's a hard time staying on task. They easily get distracted. A lot of times, we'll see kids that, they can sit and watch their iPad for hours. There's no way this kid has ADHD. Well, if you look at what they're watching 5-minute videos, or even 2 minutes into, or 2 seconds into a video, and they're already going to the next video, or they're already clicking on the next thing. So there isn't that length of attention span. They have a hard time with that length of attention.
Yeah.
And we see this in adults as well. It's not just something that happens whenever they're kids. It's something that kind of carries on. A lot of times they develop some coping skills and some tools that they kind of use to help get through, their diagnosis.
Yeah.
So.
And as for someone like for you, you said you were never officially diagnosed, but as you were reading the DSM, you're like, oh my gosh, this is me. So growing up, as a kid in elementary school and then middle school and high school, and then, the first little bit of college, knowing you had this attention deficit situation, did you have the hyperactivity too, or is it mainly just the attention? Oh, it's both. Okay, you had all of it. Yeah. So was it absolutely exhausting and draining for you going through school, trying to focus, not knowing what was wrong with you? Was there guilt? Was there frustration? What were your emotions as an undiagnosed ADHD kid going through this?
I mean, there was definitely a lot of that. I know I put my parents through the ringer. I know that there were days that they were frustrated. They definitely learned how to tag team. Doing homework with Mike, that was always kind of the hardest thing was trying to do homework. I remember learning to read was a difficult thing for me. Just having that attention span of being able to read and also comprehend what I was reading was a difficult thing. Paying attention during test in a test environment, it's very quiet. There's no talking. Yeah. And I just want to run around and, go crazy. So sitting still and taking a test and focusing on the test was a difficult thing sometimes. And so a lot of times kids nowadays, there's different accommodations that they make for kids, whether it's additional homework time or a different testing environment that maybe is more helpful for them. All kinds of different things I've seen on, individualized education plans for kids. So
yeah. IEPs, I'm familiar with those. When I was teaching, I taught at a school there in Lakeland, and we had a whole special education building for kids who had IEPs. And I loved the teachers that worked in there because they spent time with each individual student, met them right where they were, and it was incredible. But yeah, I've talked to several different people who grew up with ADHD and it was undiagnosed. It was so frustrating. And do you think low self-esteem and low self-confidence is something that accompanies this, especially if it's undiagnosed, just because of just the frustration, of having to deal with it, not knowing what it is?
Yeah, well, for me, one of the things that it was very helpful was being involved in extracurricular activities.
Okay.
And so while I may not have had the confidence that I was a great student or I was going to be, a straight A student, I
Yeah.
did have confidence in my social skills as far as interacting with my teammates and being friends with people. And, of course, go figure, I'm huge on play. And so
Yeah.
playing was what I was good at. And so, I didn't really notice a detriment to my self-esteem, but that's not to say that it doesn't happen. I'm sure it
Yeah.
does happen for some
Yeah.
kids. For some kids, I'm sure, oh man, I'm not a good student, or, feeling some of that guilt or shame if that's the emphasis in their structure is school and they're struggling at school. And ADHD is a hereditary thing. So a lot of times whenever I get, parents in here and I'm talking to the parents and kind of going over some stuff, I see moms or dads kind of look at and go, they got it from you, So especially whenever I start, explaining some of these things, they're like, that's why I don't do well in this area, or that's why I'm always disorganized all the time. I just thought I was a disorganized person, but sometimes they're able to kind of see some of these things and say, oh, wow, that is, ADHD.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I guess like my next question would be, and it's always so funny because I always send the people I interview questions ahead of time and then I never stick to them.
I barely read the list that you gave me.
Okay, good. Okay. He knows. Like basically that whole front half wasn't even on the paper. Okay, so here is one question I'd written down is, at what point should you consider that your child should be evaluated? Like, so if a parent's listening to this and they're like, like what's the difference between a kid? So I have 4, right? And they're all high octane, high energy, but there's 4 of them, 8, 6, I don't know what ages they are, 4 and 1. So, like, how do you know the difference between they're a kid and they're just bored with their homework or they're tired? One of the things is like my kids come home and I want them to get their homework done right away so we don't have to worry about it. They're exhausted. They're having trouble paying attention. That's just, so how do you know the difference between, their kids?
Normal kid behavior. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, what kid doesn't have difficulty sitting still or is fidgety or has a hard time waiting their turn? Those are all, signs that we look at. But it's more of that ability. Do they have the ability to be able to do that? And so it's not, oh, well, if we're in a chaotic environment and we're all, trying to get ready in the morning for school and there's, lots of stuff. Well, it's not, oh, well, they, often forget their responsibilities, or they're not following through on task, or they're having a hard time paying. Well, yeah, of course they're inattentive. I mean, what kid isn't? So once again, it's do they have the ability to be able to do this, or is this something that is just, well, it was the environment, or, oh, well, it was just.
I like that.
I hear parents a lot of times that they're like, one of the questions that I ask when trying to do a diagnosis is, I'll say, what is their behavior like at home? Do you see this at home? And a lot of times they're like, oh no, at home, everything's fine. Well, part of the diagnosis for ADHD is it has to be present in multiple environments.
Okay.
So, and I'll probably get some backlash from some colleagues, but it can't be just oh, well, they only have ADHD at school, or they only have ADHD at home, or they only have ADHD in church when we're trying to sit quietly. No, it's not something that is situational. It's something that is to that ability. And do they have the ability to do this? And do they have the ability to do it in multiple environments?
Yeah. Well, and take the backlash, because I do feel like there's a part where like we are raising very entitled children, like, they have to be catered to 24/7. We have to give them all these experiences. We have to give them all the attention they need. I told you I just had a counseling appointment with Kevin before, and inevitably we always talk about my parenting. It always comes up. And, even, I'm not a very touchy person, just because like for me, I work very hard to keep my brain centered, and it takes a lot of energy. And so touch and those sorts of things, that's a very vulnerable thing that's difficult for me. My daughter is, oh my gosh, she has to be all over me constantly, highly emotive. And so we were talking through like, how can I give that to her, but also still create healthy boundaries for myself that she can learn and respect. And I feel like there's times with kids, we're throwing all of the healthy boundaries and and we want to diagnose them with things, and we want to excuse things away. And it's like, we are the adults. We know we can set boundaries. Anyways, I'm going off a rabbit trail, but okay. So the next thing is something I just talked to Kevin about. So see, I told you it was going to affect, I told Mike, I was like, I have a counseling appointment myself before this. So who knows what, Nicole, you're going to get. How do you go about getting evaluated? So is that something like, if you think your child has it, do you go to a general practitioner? Do you go to a counselor or therapist? What would your next step be if you're thinking like, man, I think this might be something we're struggling with?
Well, and that's, once again, that's another difficult thing, because there are a lot of pediatricians out there, and I love my well-educated, and I love my pediatricians that are involved with their clients. But sometimes pediatricians, it's like, oh, well, this drug rep just left my office, let me prescribe this medication. Or they hear these kind of things and they're like, oh yeah, your kid's hyperactive, let's put them on some ADHD meds.
Yeah.
My personal recommendation is, yes, you can talk to your pediatrician, and your pediatrician may prescribe a medication for ADHD, but it's best to go to someone that is a specialist in mental health, which that would be a psychiatrist. So going to a psychiatrist and getting a prescription is the way to go, if that's something that is, that you're interested in. If you're not interested in getting a medication and you just want to, find out if your child has ADHD, there's a lot of different questionnaires and ADHD questionnaire kind of things. Usually, once again, it's too environmental, so a teacher fills out a survey, a parent fill out a survey, and then whoever's doing the diagnosis looks at those things and can kind of say, okay, yeah, that can be determined. But even then, the statistical person in me kind of goes, okay, well, I know how those teachers are, and if the teacher's filling out the form on a day whenever Johnny was running amok in class, well, they're gonna mark all of those boxes and try to make them sound like the worst kid ever. And same with parents too, that sometimes parents are, okay, well, I'm just gonna mark all of the boxes that I can. Once again, in the manual here, as I said, it talks about statistics. According to this, it says that that only 5% of children are diagnosed, are truly legitimately have ADHD.
Wow.
I've seen some other things where it says like 1 in 10 children have ADHD. But if you were to ask most kids or most teachers, they would probably say, oh, half of my classes, or oh, all of my kids are. And so there is a lot of overdiagnosing, once again, people just kind of saying, oh, well, my kid has ADHD. And so, so there is a lot of throwing that out there that, oh, well, my kid has ADHD, or oh, my kid has ADD. But, legitimately, diagnosed, needs to be done by a professional that is well knowledgeable and is able to do that diagnosing. And so those are your mental health counselors, your psychiatrists, psychologists, that are really good in it. Now there are also neurologists that will do the diagnosing too, because under a brain scan, you can definitely do a brain scan and tell the difference between an ADHD brain and a normal brain. So an ADHD brain, there are parts that are a little underdeveloped. There's also parts that are a little more active. Of course, so there is some biological differences too. And so that's where you can really tell those differences, and it's not just typical kid behavior.
And, you know, since our world has become so Zoom centric now because of COVID and everything, you know, I know a lot of people that are like, I can't find a therapist, I can't find a psychiatrist that I trust, you know. I mean, I would tell people, and I don't know if this is okay, but like, don't feel like you have to only be stuck with the people in your area. Like, if you find someone out of state or something and you want to call them and see if they'd be willing to work with you, you know, via Zoom or FaceTime or Skype, you know, like we're not limited anymore
Yeah.
to just being in our areas. And so I feel like that's something for people to hear as well.
Yeah,
Um,
that's one of the blessings of
yes,
COVID is that a lot of insurance companies, they used to not pay for telemental health, but
mm,
now they are.
yeah,
A lot of providers, they only did in-person office visits. Well, now because technology was kind of forced on us, a lot of therapists are kind of saying, you know what, I like doing Zoom meetings.
yeah,
I like having the freedom and flexibility to be anywhere anytime and do a therapy session with
yeah,
somebody.
yeah.
So there is a lot more different therapy services out there that are available through telemental health.
Yes. I know this particular mom that emailed me. Her biggest concern. So she has
Mhm.
twin boys, and they both have ADHD. And she's, you know, in the process of trying to find an advocate because she's wanting to help them, but doctors just keep throwing, kind of like what you said, they just keep kind of throwing medication on the boys, and she's not sure she wants to go that route because she's read so many different um, you know, horrible reviews over these medications and what these medications can and can't do.
Yeah.
And so she's trying to keep them unmedicated right now. But the problem she's facing is that when they're in school, um, you know, they aren't being pushed. The teachers are just kind of giving answers and not really letting them struggle. And as a teacher, and I had several, so I taught high school, I taught 10th and 11th grade. And I had one student who had he had ADHD and a sensory disorder. So like I wasn't allowed to have Glade plugins. I couldn't have any kind of scent in my room. I had to tone down my colors. We couldn't do a lot with music. Like anything would trigger him and have him go off the wall. So I had that. And then I had several other kids who had intense ADHD. And yes, it's exhausting. It's exhausting when you're teaching a whole class and you've got several that just, they can't stay with you. They just physically cannot. And so you have to get creative. So I'm not dissing teachers at all. There were times where I'm sure I just gave the answers because I'm like, I don't have anything more to give you, you know, like I have nothing left to give. Um, but how does she advocate, whatever, for her kids, her boys in this school system when, you know, the teachers aren't necessarily pushing and who knows, you know, staffing wise where they're at, but when they're just kind of giving answers, like how should she go about like, hey, you know, this isn't what we're looking for. This isn't what we need. I think she just kind of feels at a loss with that.
Excuse me. Well, yeah, and I totally get that teachers, it's exhausting,
Yeah.
I have clients on my caseload that are ADHD, and whenever they leave, I'm just kind of like, okay, I need to reset because my energy goes up as well. And
Yes.
so, I can only keep my energy up there for so long and then I need to bring it down. And
Yeah.
so for teachers, I'm sure it's exhausting and I'm sure it's tiring. And so wanting to give some answers, just kind of help move them along,
Yeah.
may seem helpful in the moment, but it is a detriment to that child. And so whether it's, once again, that individualized education plan, the IEP, if it allows the child to take that homework home,
Mm,
instead of the teacher giving the answers saying, okay, well, why don't you work on this at home? And then mom or dad can then sit with that child and try to help them out, through that in that way.
yeah.
Once again, maybe practicing some good skills as far as, being that one-on-one. Children with ADHD, a lot of times, especially if they're that inattentive type, but even the hyperactivity type, whenever they're in a one-on-one environment, they do a lot better. And
Yes.
so whether that's bringing that energy level down or whether that's helping them focus and trying to keep them on task,
Yeah.
So sending the homework home, or sending the worksheet home, or, instead of just giving answers and kind of moving them along, asking the teacher that, hey, if they get stuck on something, maybe before they go out to recess, spending a few minutes with them, or,
Yeah.
or if it means coming in a few minutes early or staying a few minutes late from school or sending the homework home, we don't
Yeah.
mind doing that at home, so that
Yeah.
way the child doesn't miss out on that opportunity.
And I love that. I know for me, one of the things that, yeah, as when I was teaching, the parents that would come at me and like, why aren't you doing this? And why can't you? And like, I need you to do more of this and I would feel on the attack. And it was almost just like, I can't give you everything you're asking for. But when parents wanted to partner with me, then I was like, okay, let's do this together. And so I think like for both teachers and parents, if somehow you both can get on the same page and work together and realize like you both want the same things and you're both exhausted and you're both frustrated, but how can you combine efforts and do it together? I think that's such a good approach, is just the partnership approach. And with the IEP, so if someone's like, okay, I think my kid has this, how do I go about getting an IEP? Is that something you do? And I can't remember, it's been so many years since I taught, so I can't remember how kids got IEPs. Again, is that through the school system? Is that through a counselor? Is that through how do you go about getting an IEP?
Usually it's something that needs to be set up with the school guidance counselor.
Okay.
Talking to them and getting that initiated. Different school systems are set up different ways. But usually there's a request for a meeting and kind of to have a meeting. And that's where, I've written notes before, or doctors will write, recommendations and kind of send those with the parents, and the parents can come in and say, hey, here's some ideas of maybe some things we can change or we can do to work best for this child. Once again, I love what you said as far as, we all want the same thing. Let's have this student achieve. Let's do whatever we can to help them succeed in school, so that they do feel good about school and they do develop that love of learning. So having that IEP is helpful. Getting, as many people involved in that as possible. I've told parents before that, I'm willing to, to write a note of some recommendations, or to consult with the teacher, or if the teacher ever wants to email me questions or how can I do this? Those, once again, we all want the same thing. We're all on the same team here. So let's do whatever we can to help each other out. And so initiating that IEP with the school, and usually that is something too that needs to be reviewed every year. And so whenever they have those yearly meetings, I know a lot of times parents' schedules are busy, and so parents just want to, oh, well, I'm fine, just, I'll just sign off on whatever changes you guys want to make. But you got to be careful about that, because you want to make sure that you're holding not only the teachers accountable, but also the students accountable to following that plan. And if that plan needs to be adjusted, it's kind of like a prescription. You want to make sure that you're involved in that and be active in that IEP process.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, like just going back to one of the things you had said is like helping that student find confidence in something. If it's not in school, extracurricular activities. And that was one thing I try to do with my students that had ADHD that were in my classroom too, is like, you know what, they may be failing English, which is what I taught, but like I can see they're incredibly artistic, or I can see, they're really a great friend. And so, when they're in my classroom, instead of focusing on, hey, you're failing this, like, let's talk about what you're succeeding, and creating, if teachers could focus more on creating that safe place to where when they come into your classroom, they don't feel like a failure, like they're falling apart. They know that you see them for who they are. I think it helps. And a lot of times with my ADHD, and I noticed this too, a lot of my ADHD kids were brilliant. I mean, brilliant. They just couldn't. So like I had one student where she was, off the charts, incredibly smart. Her IQ was wild, but she could not focus unless she was doing something. So I was like, bring in your art supplies. You can draw a mural, and you know what I'm saying? And they were old enough to know, like they had been in school with all of each other for the longest time. So the other kids knew she's getting this because, she struggles with ADHD. But that leads me to my next question is like, for students, or as we're parents, our kids with ADHD, how do we go about parenting them? Like, should we allow more slack? Should it, I'm one of those parents where I have discussions with my kids about everything, and who knows if they're old enough to hear it, but it's like, mommy's doing this because,
Right.
so is it something where, yes, they get more slack, but then it's communicated within the family? Or how do you go about parenting a child that maybe needs a little bit more, whatever it may be?
Well, the big thing with ADHD kids is teaching them what is that expectation,
Mm,
especially the inattentive types. A lot of times they're very disorganized. They often lose things. And so trying to get them, to understand the importance of putting things back where they belong, so that whenever you go to find it and your brain's going, oh my gosh, where did I leave my shoes?
yeah,
It's, oh, well, I know I leave them in the same place. And so there they go.
yeah,
That's one of the skills that I, so to speak, developed, is a little bit of OCD, because I got tired of
okay.
losing my keys all the time. I got tired of losing stuff all the time. So I became very rigid about where to put things so that I could find them.
Hmm,
And that was something that I can still hear my mom saying, put it back where you found it, because
yeah,
that's
yeah.
where that was drilled into me. And so, you know, also one step directions, kind of staying
Hmm,
on track and saying, okay, you know, go do this, and then come
yeah,
back and tell me whenever you've done it. And so then they go and they do that and they come back. And especially your hyperactive kids, they love running as many times as they can run back and forth. That's burning that energy up. And so go do this. And then they come back. Okay, what's next? Go do this. And then they come back.
yeah,
Okay, what's next? Go do this. And then come back. So giving them that kind of one step instructions. If you say, I need you to do this, this, and this,
oh
they're gonna be
my,
like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah,
So you kind of have to do those one step instructions. And of course, as they get better and as they show mastery of certain things, then you can add more. But starting off small of what they are capable of, and once again, seeing what they are capable of, and
Hmm,
trying to help them in that area that they're capable of, and then growing that capacity to be able to do those things.
yeah, I love that. And I think we need to not lose the joy of ADHD kids. I know they're a lot, but there's just this joy to their energy. And I know as a parent of 4 kids, like it can just get exhausting and chaotic, but try not to lose the joy, the joy of I'm just laughing, is like back and forth, back and
Yeah.
forth.
But
Um,
once again, using some of that energy to your advantage.
yeah,
I remember in school, I think all my teachers knew that I was ADHD, but it was like, hey, if you need an errand run, have Mike do it.
yeah,
This was
yeah,
back before cell phones and teachers would text each other, but it was,
yeah,
oh, let's send Mike. It was probably to get me out of the classroom so they could get
yeah.
instruction done.
I was like,
But
please go take a
it
walk.
was like, go do this, go do this, go do this. And so that moving around, using that to the advantage, is very helpful.
Yeah,
Burning up some of that energy, because we all are physical, we all are human, and so your body's going to get tired.
yeah,
It may seem like they have abundant energy. Well, if they have abundant energy, give them some place to burn that. And
yeah,
then whenever they burn that, then that's whenever maybe you do the instructional time.
yeah,
I remember as once again, a parenting thing, whenever I'd come home from school, I had been sitting and doing school for so long. My parents were like, go run, go play, go have fun, go outside, burn up that energy. And then whenever you come back in, that's whenever we're going to try to do homework. We're not
I
going
love
to,
it.
oh, well, you've been at school for 12 hours. Let's have you sit for another 2 and do homework. So,
Yeah, yeah,
what works best for the parents and for the child, kind of finding those things. And that's where some of that treatment of ADHD comes in, is developing those individualized skills, individualized things that work best for each client and for each person.
yeah.
What works for one may not work for somebody else. Somebody else may say, you know what, being organized, that's just not my wheelhouse yet.
For the
Like,
birds. Yeah,
I'm not there.
yeah.
So looking at, once again, what is that capability, and trying to develop and grow in that, and harness that as a skill, as a tool for managing ADHD.
I love that because, yeah, I think sometimes as parents, we can be like, why don't you look like ABC, and like, why can't you get these skills? But it's meeting each kid where they're at, like my son, Ryder, is incredibly organized. I mean, his room's immaculate, so much so that he doesn't even want to play in it. Now, we've gotten past that stage, but he wouldn't want to play in it. And then my daughter, like her clothes are like strung throughout my entire house, and we've got toys every which way. And first it's frustrating, like, why can't you be like Ryder and have everything clean? But then it was realizing, like, this girl is creative. She's, big, emotive, and letting her be in that space, but then also teaching her, like, hey, your room doesn't have to be immaculate, but let's just kind of figure out,
Right.
general locations of where things should be. And so it's just kind of meeting your kids where they're at. How do we, okay, last two questions here. Well, I guess one other question is, like, so if you have a child who has ADHD and you have other kids, like, is this something where you should call a family meeting and just be like, hey, just so you know, so-and-so has this, here's how, not to embarrass them, but just kind of get the family on the same page? Or is it something like those kids probably know, so you don't draw attention to it? How do you get your whole family on the same page with it?
Well, just kind of thinking from my own household, my son, kind of his journey, we did put him on medication for a little while, and it was very helpful. We saw a major change in grades. We saw, a major change in his eating. That is one of the big drawbacks sometimes of ADHD medication, is that there's a lot of loss of appetite.
Really interesting.
Medication. And so it got to a point where it was kind of like, okay, because he was on the medication, we were able to develop some good skills.
Yeah.
As far as some of that organizational stuff goes, as far as some of that, being able to pay attention and getting some of that comprehension stuff goes.
Yeah.
And so we all kind of made the decision, okay, well, we're gonna go off medication and see how things go. And he's been a much better student. Just yesterday, he's still on the AB honor roll. So we were like,
that's awesome. Day by day. Yeah.
Yeah. So so finding, once again, those things that work, and what is going to be the best choice, and kind of looking at that for the family. So my other kids, they heard us talking about focus, they heard us talking about attention, and that's something that all kids, like we started off saying,
Yeah.
A lot of kids have attention problems, a lot of kids have focus problem, a lot of kids have excessive amount of energy at times.
Yeah.
So it's something that we can teach all of our kids, is kind of what is that appropriate attention, what is appropriate energy level, when is it appropriate to be loud and rambunctious and running around, and when is it, okay, now it's time to calm down, now it's time to be quiet, now it's time to learn how to control ourselves. So we've had discussions in our house, and it wasn't necessarily a, hey, by the way, your brother has ADHD, and your dad has ADHD and anxiety. No, we haven't had those big major, but that's not to say that if it was something that was going to be helpful, then we probably would. But just talking to our kids in general about those things. And
I love that.
I praise, my youngest daughter whenever she's doing something great, oh, good job paying attention and focusing on this. That's good. Once again, praising those things, focusing on those positive things when they're, have good energy, have good focus, have good attention. Those are good skills for all kids.
Yeah, I love that. So, like, if you have a kid that's struggling with it, instead of just zoning in on what they're doing well, it's like working that into the whole family. Like, thank you all for that's awesome, making it a team effort.
Yeah.
So I guess the last two questions can kind of be one and the same. So I guess part A is, how do we advocate for our kids with doctors, therapists, psychiatrists, and teachers? We've really kind of covered that, really looking to partner with them. And so skip that question. We've covered that. So the last question is this. What would you say to encourage parents with kids with ADD and ADHD? Like, some of them just feel so discouraged, so alone, so burnt out, so frustrated. I sensed even in that email I'd gotten from my friend, just some fear even of like, what if we can't get this right? Like what if we can't figure this out with the teachers or the doctors or whatever? So
Yeah.
what would you say to parents who are just kind of feeling like they're drowning with this right now? Like they haven't gotten it figured out and they just don't know what to do.
Well, trying to find some professional help is a good route. And I'm never offended if people are like, you know what, we just want to try a different therapist, or we're going to see a different one. Great. Once again, we're all here for the same thing. I want to see what's best for your child. And so if my therapy sessions, if my approach to helping him with his ADHD isn't something that's working well, and you want to go see somebody else, that's great. I want you to find what works well. And so I guess the message to those parents would be, don't give up. If you feel like this isn't working, then okay, well, let's not do that. Let's try something different. Let's go see a different professional, or let's, maybe get some additional tutoring, or maybe let's sign them up for, karate, or for, a different sport, and once again, also, focusing on what they're doing right and what they're doing well. Finding those skills that they're doing good at and encouraging and bolstering that, so that way they have some self-confidence and can grow from there. Advocating for the teachers and kind of saying, okay, what's working at school, what isn't working at school. So just trying to kind of find what works for them individually.
And I think like one of the things I had told this mom, and because we haven't had ADHD diagnoses, yet, I guess, who knows if that'll be something in our future. But, with our kids as close in age as they are and as young as they are, we've gone through some difficult situations with them, trying to figure out, okay, how do we parent in this situation? And there's so many of them and they're so different. And one of the things I encourage my friend, and maybe someone else needs to hear this, is like, God specifically chose you as the parent for this child, and he has equipped you and given you the tools that you need to parent this child. And sometimes we just have to take a pause and just remind ourselves of like, I am the best person for this child because God has given this child to me. And he wants what's best for this child. And so I just need to take a beat maybe and just reach out to God and just be like, okay, what am I missing? What do I need to do in this situation? And I really believe God has given us intuition and wisdom as parents. He's given us that ability to be able to kind of come up with creative solutions and to see through different situations. And so don't be afraid to trust yourself as a parent either. And but just remember, God has chosen you. He's going to give you the strength. He's going to give you the wisdom and the creativity for it. And just finding someone, I think it's so good. You talked about this in the beginning, but parents in therapy with their kids, or maybe coming separate, I think having your child see a counselor that you trust, as well as maybe like the IEPs and everything else as they're working through ADHD. Because one thing in counseling is that you work on different techniques to deal with triggers and to deal with different life events. And then I think also you as a parent seeing a counselor who maybe has some specialized, training in ADHD, so that you know how to interact with your kid. And then they also help you cope and work through all of the feelings and frustration you're feeling, and take the guilt off of it. It's okay to be frustrated. Like, it's okay for us to want to kill our children sometimes. Now, don't do it, but to be so frustrated, that's okay. So I don't know, Mike, thank you so much. I think this has been really helpful. This has been great for me, an awesome learning experience. I always enjoy our time together. And so if you guys have any questions or you want more information about some stuff that we've covered, we can have Mike on again. This is the second time. We'll make him a regular. So, but thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to check out NicoleGolden.org. And we will see you guys again next time. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks.